Welcome back to another episode of Code Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Hey, Fitz.
Hi, Ray.
Today we have a very special guest joining us, retired FBI agent and author of the book The Queen of Cuba, Pete Lapp. Pete, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Pete.
Hey, Fritz, how are you?
I'm great. I want to hear all about your career, how you got into the FBI, and I see the book right over your left shoulder there. I want to talk about that, but I know you've got some Philly connections like we do. Tell us about the early part.
There it is. Born and raised in South Jersey and grew up on a dirt road right across from a peach orchard in Fry's Mill, New Jersey. And I understand the road is now paved, finally. No, from there, grew up around the Philadelphia area my whole life until the FBI. Somehow I snuck through the cracks and got hired, beat the system and got in. And, after I got into the FBI, moved to the Washington, D.C. area. And for the most part, the 22 years I was in the FBI, we went home for 3 years back to Westchester. And I don't care what John Bon Jovi says. I say you can't go home. It just changed. We had become Northern Virginia people and came back here, moved up to headquarters and then spent the rest of my career here in the DC area. So this is home for us, for me now.
And by the way, it was Thomas Wolfe before Bon Jovi, but that's just a little literary reference there about the home thing. It's true sometimes, other times it's not, but
yeah.
So you went to school, I think, in the Philly area, right?
Went to Westchester University, and then I went and got my master's at St. Joe's. And my father had graduated from Westchester. He was actually on the track team at St. Joe's with Vince Papale. And they were Vince was I think Vince was a sprinter. My dad threw javelin and discus. And I wanted to follow in his footsteps and go to St. Joe's, but I wasn't quite smart enough. So rejection began early in my life with thanks to St. Joe's. And I'll tell you, Westchester was just a phenomenal experience. It's a great town. I met my roommate. I had this aspiration to be the next Bon Jovi, which was ridiculous because I lacked talent and I lacked, dedication and I lacked practicing. I just wanted to be a rock star. Like I didn't want to do the work. I just wanted to be the rock star up on stage. And that was kind of a dream that dissipated real quick. And my roommate, I said, what are you going to do? And he said, I want to be a Maryland State Trooper. And I said, that sounds kind of cool. And New Jersey, growing up in New Jersey, the New Jersey State Police had a phenomenal presence. The uniforms were just so impressive. Their demeanor, they always seemed, anytime you saw a trooper, even when you were being pulled over, you felt like they were in control and it was a positive energy. And I said, I'd like to do that. So it kind of pivoted my life to the direction of law enforcement and away from rock star.
Well, a lot of young people listen to this show, and I always like to put the stories out there, the origin stories, as they say, of our guest. And yeah, not all of us had silver spoons in our mouths when we were born, and some of us struggled through school and maybe took a left turn when we should have gone right. So, I applied to the Bureau the first time. I didn't pass the test. I did it a second time, and I did. And so sometimes I think I kind of, zigzagged my way in there, but I don't think looking back, the Bureau has any regrets. Ray, you and I have talked about that. Sometimes we feel that we're lucky to have one of the best jobs in the world, but it could have gone in different directions, as we know.
Yeah, well, Pete, like Jim, I took the Bureau exam the first time and didn't pass it as well, and then took it a second time. But the funny thing is I'm a Jersey guy too. When my dad got back from Vietnam, we moved over to New Jersey. And I went to Kutztown, so we were kind of rivals. I played football. So we would come down there, and one of the things I did my junior year, in the spring of my junior year, is I took the state police exam for New Jersey. Me and another ball player, because I always wanted to be a cop. And when I did that, I passed that test, and they called me in the fall to actually was in the summer to appear in the fall down at Seagirt for a panel interview. And I asked them if I could put things on hold until I finished my last year of school.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, no, you had to start all over again. So that's what I did. And I never went back. I never went back. It's kind of everything happens for a reason, but small world, how we could have probably crossed each other had you gone that route too, really interesting. So
I credit my roommate, Joe Ashman, for being the muse, if you will, for the path that I went on in law enforcement. And then my freshman year, Thanksgiving, my father lost his job. He was working at Oyster Creek Nuclear Power Plant in Forked River. And he picks me up, and I remember exactly where I was. And he just picked me up. He said, I got bad news. I lost my job. You might want to think about the Army and ROTC. And I'm like, what the hell is ROTC? The shock was just palatable. And I knew that, I was going to have to pay for college on my own, and decided to enlist in the Army National Guard. We had a unit down the street, and went to basic training at the base formerly known as Fort Benning in Georgia. And, came back and contracted as an ROTC cadet, and then worked towards getting a commission in the National Guard, but doing the 1 week in a month, getting paid, getting the GI Bill, getting all the benefits. And it changed the course of my life. It really was, the silver spoon aspect, I get 100% because nothing was given to me. I had to kind of, scrap for it every step of the way. So, but it's what made me, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't be this person if I didn't have to scrap like that, working so hard in undergraduate school, doing all that, Army stuff.
So let's go back 1 sec before we get into your book. Let's talk about this rock star thing. I'm really interested in this rock star thing, Pete.
Hold on. Here's the guitar. There's the guitar.
Well, I'm not going to ask you to sing the song.
Let me add here, just about 2 weeks ago, we had an actual former rock star as our guest. And our friend Rob Leonard is a linguist at Hofstra University. So he was in the band Sha Na Na back in the 60s and early 70s. So now here we have someone who maybe almost got there. Let's hear your story, Pete.
I never got to that level, to be honest with you. I mean, wow, that's impressive. I had played guitar in high school off and on. I took lessons. The teacher I took was he taught Al Di Meola. Al Di Meola is a big jazz guitarist name. He's one of the better guitar players in the world. And my teacher's style was jazz and classical. I didn't really like it. I wanted to play rock and roll. I wanted to play Van Halen and Bon Jovi and all that stuff. So I got enough lessons to get started, and then I kind of would pick up my guitar and put it down, and pick it up and put it down, over the years. And then, frankly, when I got separated and divorced at the age of 40, I was 12 years in the FBI. We made good money in the Bureau, but, having two houses in Northern Virginia or two homes, that gets real expensive real quick. And I needed an outlet, but I also needed a way of kind of a side gig, to be frank. And I went to an open mic, and I practiced and practiced and practiced. And I sang Wanted Dead or Alive in front of, people I'd never met before. And they knew how nervous I was. And the crowd was like singing with me, the Richie Sambora, want it, singing along. And I felt that energy, and it was like, oh, wow, this is what it feels like. This is cool. And I just kept practicing and practicing and practicing. And finally, Ray, Christian Zajac, right?
I do.
So Christian had a band, and it was New Year's Eve of 2012. And I said, can I open for your band? And he had a 2-man band. And he said, yeah, I'm not going to pay you, but go ahead, get up on stage and, sing. And I played my 10 songs. I practiced. I poured my heart out, really worked hard on those 10, the only 10 songs I knew. And he introduces me to the manager, and the manager said, "Hey, you're pretty good. Do you play out?" And I said, "No, but I'm trying to get to that level. What do you pay? Just out of curiosity, what do you pay?" And she said, "For a solo guy, for 2 hours on my patio, like $200 to $300." And I'm like, "I'm going to get back to you." And that is a true story. 10 months later, my first professional gig was on her patio in it was McGurk's up in Montgomery County, I think. And I made $250 singing and playing guitar in front of people for 2 hours. And it was like hooked. It was just so much fun to entertain people. Sometimes you were the background. Sometimes you were, people were singing along. It depends on the time of night, the day of the week, the amount of alcohol they've had, the songs you do. Sometimes they're sing-along songs, and sometimes they want it, and sometimes they don't. So it's all about reading the audience and knowing the mood and setting the mood. And it became a moonlighting gig for me. And the Bureau knew most of it. I mean, they had approved a little bit of it, but I don't think they knew how much I was playing. But I needed that outlet going through, the life change of the divorce and not having my kids with me all the time, and trying to just stay financially alive with 2 houses. So that's the truth.
Pete, 2 questions. Did your audience know they were being serenaded by an FBI agent? And were you carrying your piece under your behind your guitar?
Yes, sometimes, and no, because I made it a rule that if I was going to go out and be anywhere near alcohol, I was not going to be armed. That was just, more bad in my mind. More bad things would happen with alcohol and my gun than without my gun. So I just made it, and I would leave it. I'd be that guy who leaves it in the bathroom or leaves it behind the guitar and goes, "Where did I leave that?" So the world's safer with me not combining those two. But there were times a lot of people got to know who I was as an FBI agent, and I had no problem at that point in time in my career. I was kind of a public figure, in part because I did a lot of talks publicly about the case, and I was doing that outreach for the Bureau, so I was out and about anyway. It wasn't an issue.
I find it fascinating. You don't run into too many people like you that have the opportunity to live their dream twice. Once as an agent, another as a singer, and really a third time now as an author. It's just amazing. What a life you had, Pete. And I mean, what an inspiration to a lot of our listeners that they look at this and they figure, hey, hard work, it doesn't matter. As long as you work hard, you're going to achieve. And I think that's a great message that you're resonating with everybody that's listening to us.
I think whatever we do, we have to have an outlet. I don't care if you were a salesperson for whatever. I mean, if your whole identity is based on, in our former lives, the badge and the gun, what happens when those things go away because you've retired? You have to have more of an identity. And the music helped me create this identity besides FBI Agent Pete Lapp, which I enjoyed having, not dual identities, but just kind of a different side of me that I got to express and people got to know.
And as a cop early on, I picked up on that. I became a sergeant, and at roll call, just having conversations with my squad. It applies to the FBI. If it's only the badge and the gun is your whole life, you're going to get in trouble, and you're not going to be happy. And when that retirement day comes, and in law enforcement, at least in some agencies like the FBI, there's a certain age you reach, you have to retire. You're forced out the door. They'll give you 1 extra year, maybe 2 in some exigent circumstances, but yeah, and it's the agents and the cops. That's all they live and breathe. And I know academics, and sometimes they go to conference and they'd be talking, their particular trade or expertise the whole dinner after a few drinks. And I know, my wife Natalie would go with them and say, look, we're kind of off the clock. And I was the same way. And Ray and I would go to a conference, whatever we would do in training. Once we get out and we're done, let's talk about the game the night before, sports, playing an instrument, whatever, going fishing with the kids the next day, something like that. There's only so much you can do. And if your whole persona is wrapped around that, and it's not only law enforcement, but I think that could be one of the bigger, more prominent professions that it can really cause problems in the long run.
It's not healthy. Not healthy.
I'd love to hear about your career as an agent and how it led into this story. I mean, where did you start? You came out of Quantico. Did you go right to Washington Field Office, WFO, or did you go somewhere else? Did you spend your whole career there? What did you work?
Yeah, so I knew I processed out of Philadelphia, Barb Donnelly, and Mike O'Brien, and it's funny because I knew a little bit about Mike when he was a cop at West Goshen, and right. And then I processed in with Bill. He became the head of the New York field office. Bill Sweeney.
Bill Sweeney, yeah.
Bill Sweeney. So yeah, we ran the fifth test together at the Penn University of Pennsylvania track, and I tease him when I talk to him. I said, "You're still running. You're so slow." He's still not very. He's not very aerodynamic. So
big guy.
No, I knew I wasn't going back to Philly. The odds of going back to Philadelphia were slim and none, and I didn't want to go to New York. I was deathly afraid of New York, cost of living, traffic, the whole thing. So I had a sense that Washington Field was going to be a big office that they would try and fill. So I put that number 1. And then I put Baltimore number 2, and then Philly number 3. And then New York and Newark were like 55 and 56. So I was kind of, I think I was strategic. And as fate would have it, there were 5 people that got selected to go to Washington Field. I was one of them. From there, I assumed the FBI in its infinite wisdom would take my police officer career, my criminal justice degree, my master's in criminal justice degree, and that's pretty much all I knew, and put me to work doing the cool stuff, gangs, drugs, homicides, robberies, the whole, or whatever, the criminal, the kick indoors, the reason we all get in the FBI. And I got a call halfway through Quantico from my new supervisor, and she called to introduce herself. And she said, "Hey, my name is Diane. I'm your new boss. Congratulations. You're coming to the Cuban Counterintelligence Squad." And pre 9/11, national security training was 1 day, maybe a day and a half. I mean, you learned about CI, CT, espionage, FISA, national security, all the national security stuff was maybe a day and a half. And I asked her, I said, "What the hell is that?" And she said, I can't tell you over the phone. And my heart, I could just feel my energy just leave my body, because what I enjoyed about being a cop, what helped me get through it was coming home that night, or the next day, whenever, depending on the shift, and talking to my wife. And I wouldn't say names, but I would tell stories, right? It was a way of kind of releasing that, we did this, we chased, all the kind of, it was almost therapeutic. And now I was going into a world where we can't even talk about what we do to our spouse. And that was really, really hard. And I don't think people generally appreciate how difficult a lifestyle that is. I don't know how your experiences were, and I know if you told stories about work, you left out like names, but at the same time, like Cuban counterintelligence. What did you do today? Stuff. Where'd you go? Places. I could talk about what I had for lunch. That was pretty much it. And I remember distinctly with the Montes case, we had been working it for 10 months, and it was by far the biggest case of my career. And the night before we made the arrest, I sat my ex-wife down at the time, and I said, "Tomorrow I'm going to make I'm going to be part of a major arrest. It's going to be on TV. We're going to arrest a woman for espionage. And that's all I probably told her too much, to be honest with you. Yeah. And she's like, okay, that's great. Ethan's crying. Can you go get him? He was 2.5 weeks old. So that just was, I found it to be a very hard lifestyle.
I agree with that. I mean, it
get it too.
To me. We did an investigation on the Boeing Corporation. Arrested over 80 people there, and the whole time the investigation lasted 5 years, and my daughter worked there. My best friend was one of the top level executives there, and I would walk on campus and I had a name tag, but nobody ever saw me because we're doing things. We had cameras up, with all the Chinooks and the Department of Defense. It was all those things I never mentioned to my wife or my daughter. And then when we came in to do the arrest, just like you, my daughter called me and said, Dad, the FBI's here. Do you know what's going on? And I said, yes, I do. And I says, I'll tell you about it at home, but don't tell anybody your dad works for the FBI. Because I didn't want anything to come back on her. So I get it. I get what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's a part of the job that I don't know that people, I mean, hopefully your listeners are, if they're applying, I wouldn't say that it should, I hope it doesn't, kind of cause them to have pause and not apply, because the FBI needs good people to come in and carry that legacy on. But just to know up front, it can be a difficult lifestyle for families. And, you tend to be very inclusive. You may know a neighbor or two. They may know what you do. You see these different cars in front of your house, but it's not the easiest of lifestyles. So
there's kind of an irony here, Pete, in that the case you're about to share with us was of a woman who had a job in Intel, and then she liked to talk, and she talked to the people who wanted to listen to what she had to say and make money. So not everyone has the same philosophy as the vast majority of us in the FBI. And I know she was in a different DIA, right, if I recall?
Yeah, the
defense. You can explain all these acronyms. So, walk us through this. You're in your office one day and a file gets put on your desk, or you have a new case assigned to you. How does this all play out?
So the Bureau had been working, we had what the FBI is allowing me to say is a lot of what we call unsolved cases, unknown subjects. We knew that the Cubans had a multitude of illegal officers and agents and access agents. We knew a lot of tidbits about these people, but they were literally dozens and dozens and dozens of needles in dozens and dozens and dozens of haystacks. And it wasn't just one case on one person who became identified as Montes. So we had tidbits. We worked with some folks at NSA. We worked with some folks at another agency that didn't allow me to say who they are. And we kind of had a hodgepodge team. And we were going through these cases trying to get some names with these people. And it was incredibly difficult. Late 2000, outside of, beyond the knowledge of the FBI, some of the tidbits were shared by an analyst at NSA with someone at the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. And at the time, DIA had not been in the need to know circle. We didn't think that, DOD has 44 different components. There is 1.3 million uniformed personnel in the Department of Defense and over 800,000 civilians, not including contractors. It is a mammoth organization. So NSA being part of DOD, we thought we kind of had DOD covered. And in fact, we really didn't. She reaches out to someone that she had met at DIA, gives them some of the tidbits that at the time were, top secret, compartmented, very, very sensitive. It's now been declassified because it's in the book. And that person said, this sounds like DIA. And in addition, this sounds like it might be Ana Montes. It could be other people, but from what I'm hearing, it does sound like it's definitely us. So it opened the aperture to another agency that we weren't even looking at. We were looking at the CIA first, frankly.
When you mention some of these acronyms, Pete, I know what they mean. Jim knows what they mean, but I'm sure our listeners have no idea what DIA is, or NSA, or even DOD, DOJ. So if you just mention some of those as you talk, kind of gives them a heads up.
NSA being the National Security Agency, they do signals intelligence for the intelligence community. They're also nicknamed No Such Agency, which is kind of funny because they don't want any publicity. The DIA is the Defense Intelligence Agency, and there are 18 now agencies of the U.S. intelligence community, of which part of the FBI is the national security branch of the FBI is is part of the intelligence community. But DIA is essentially the CIA, for the Department of Defense. It collects military intelligence, it analyzes military intelligence, but its prime customer is the warfighters and the policymakers within the Department of Defense. Unlike the CIA, which its prime customers is the president, vice president, National Security Council, and then the rest of the intelligence community. So DIA is a very important part of the intelligence community, but we weren't even looking at them. I don't know that we could spell DIA at the time. They were not even on our radar because we were methodically working through one of the tidbits. It's interesting. One of the tidbits we knew. So the Cubans, on the Cuban side of things, they have Department M1 of the Cuban Intelligence Service is the United States. And Department M11 targets the White House, State Department, and Congress, what they call the policy, the political, and political with a small p, not D's and R's. M12 is what the Cubans refer to as the enemy services, which includes the FBI, 35,000 employees, the CIA, which, Wikipedia says 20,000. I don't know the true number. And then the Department of Defense, which is, like I said, our suspect pool for this Agent S was 2.5 million people, not including contractors, and that's a huge pool to try and tackle and identify. Now, there were some things we knew, the high frequency messages, and by the way, that's the shortwave radio that she used.
Cool.
The high frequency messages were transmitted from Cuba to the United States on frequencies that you could hear from North Carolina to New England. So, and that's a big stretch of country, right? If you're in California, you couldn't hear these frequencies. If you're in Guam, Hawaii, anything west of the Ohio Valley, you're not hearing this. So you can't be a suspect. So we took that 2.5 million and theoretically could narrow that down to 400,000 to 500,000, which is still it's still a lot of people. So this is kind of what get us going. And then, DIA had a suspicion about her, looked at a travel record, because one of the other tidbits we knew was that this Agent S had traveled to Guantanamo Bay on TDY. They went on temporary assignment. It wasn't a covert mission. It was, got permission from their boss to go to Guantanamo Bay. So there were records, travel records. And sure enough, one of the security guys at DIA, went through the travel records, and her name popped out as being one of the only people that had traveled to Guantanamo Bay in that period. And that guy had an interview with Ana Montes about 4 years earlier. And there was a suspicion about her and Malcolm Gladwell writes about this in his book, Talking to Strangers. If you've read Talking to Strangers, he talks about this interaction that Scott Carmichael from DIA had with Ana Montes. And there was an observation by somebody in that time frame, 96. But, he interviews her. She provides reasonable explanations as to why she did what she did, and case was closed because there wasn't enough information to go on. But when he saw her name in the travel records, he had his oh shit moment, and that's when
Pete, if I can just interject here, if she's with the DIA and traveling to a U.S. military base, which happens to be in a certain corner of Cuba,
yeah,
and I've been there for 6 weeks interviewing some of the detainees back in the day, that in of itself wouldn't raise flags, right? Because she's in a controlled environment. I was getting stopped all the time by the military police. You're taking a picture of a nice sunset, and they pull up, no cameras, and they almost make you delete it right there if possible. So did it ever come out in the investigation? I don't want to get too ahead of us here, but was she actually meeting with anyone at the fence or something while she was in Gitmo?
I don't think when she went to Gitmo. No, she did travel to when Pope John Paul II traveled to Cuba and met with Fidel. I want to say 1998. She did go to Havana, so not to Guantanamo Bay. Went to the actual U.S. interest section and went on another TDY to support the Pope's visit to Cuba, and then she did meet with the Cubans every night in a safe house and talked about what she learned that day. So that trip was a quasi-business trip, quasi-operational trip. The Gitmo trip, I think, was just straight up our government business, not theirs.
And how did you find out about that in '98? Did you have people on her when she's down there in Havana? Or
no. This information would have come to us. I think we probably had identified the trip because she would have filed travel records and it was official.
Right.
But that when we talked to her post arrest, post conviction as part of the plea agreement, that's when we learned that she would meet with the Cubans every night, during the post visit.
Interesting. Now, from what I understand after reading your book, which by the way was fantastic, and at the end of our show, we want to tell all our listeners how to get a copy of that book. And maybe there's some way that they can send it to you and you can sign it for me, Pete. But I'll leave that up to you. But most, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong because this is your area of expertise, but most of the people, Ames, Hansen, and some of the other spies, were always passing documents. Mm-hmm. But she didn't do that, did she? She did something.
And to your point, most of the other spies were men.
Yes.
Her gender, it's funny. I did an interview recently, recorded an interview that for something that I can't tell you all right now, but it's going to be really cool when it airs. It's going to be really cool. And I sat with the correspondent and I asked her, I said, and phenomenal correspondent. I said, if Ana was a man, are we sitting down talking? She goes, absolutely not. It's not, it's an interesting case, but it's not to this level interesting. Her gender is the reason why we're talking about this case. There are so few women that the FBI or anyone in modern times. Now, World War II, there were a lot of women who were spying in the Civil War and all those, the kind of that generation. But modern times, and it's an interesting, why? Why are women better at not getting caught? Are women better at saying, this is stupid, I'm going to get caught, why would I do this? Are they, are there too many, dual, they have careers, but they have, they're racing kids to here and there. I don't know. I mean, but for gender is significant, I think, in terms of the historical aspect. But you're right. The other guys, printed documents or took pictures of documents, and the majority of her methodology was to memorize. Every day she went to work, she memorized the three most important things she thought the Cubans needed to know, and then she would write them up or type them up, and then get that to her illegal officer in broad daylight, essentially.
There's a play in a movie called The 39 Steps, and that's there's some spy elements to it. And there was just a person who was a professional memorizer, so to speak, and that kind of put the whole case together there. So here she's using techniques just using her brain, not making photocopies or taking little pictures. Amazing.
Which to me, when I think of that, if I'm on the other end and I'm listening to this, my question is, how the hell did this person come on your radar? I mean, she's not taking anything out. She's not leaving with anything. There's no pictures. There's no exchange. Although there is some document transference, but it's just on her computer at home, which I guess could be something. But how does she come on your radar?
Well, again, it's this information, that the intelligence that we had, that there was a problem among many problems, and the right person heard the right tidbit, and then start to think, well, this is DIA, and if it's DIA, it might be Ana, and let's check this other tidbit, see who traveled, and then her name really popped up, and I think it was the other interaction that she had in 1996 with DIA security. The Queen of Cuba is that was kind of her nickname, and not everyone. Some people were like, yeah, she's the Queen of Cuba. It was a little derisive, and other people were like, well, she's probably going to go to this meeting because she's the Queen of Cuba. Like, it was an unofficial nickname, but this reputation that she built of being the go-to person, I think insulated her from concerns and security awareness and any little, side eyes at a meeting or any kind of, I think her reputation and her accomplishments really helped to put a force field around her from a security perspective, because I think people were like, her boss, the day she was arrested, he was stunned. And he's like, she's like literally my best analyst, like far and away.
The Cubans felt the same way about her, apparently.
They absolutely felt the same way about her. Yep.
I got to say that this is probably, other the fact that she's female, but her methods were so unorthodox.
Yep.
The memorization. Many of these other individuals, they did it out of greed. They did it for money.
Yeah.
What was her reason for doing it? It wasn't money.
So there's a standard MICE phrase: money, ideology, coercion, and ego. And I think it's dated because if you don't do it for money and you weren't blackmailed, then it's ideology. And I think it's a little intellectually lazy. I think she was. I don't think she would say, I believe in the Cubans. Like, I believe in how they run their government, how they, what they're doing to their people. Would not call her pro-Cuban. I would call her, I refer to her as being anti-American. I think she hates our country and really hates the, in her words, the interventionalist aspect of what we've done. El Salvador, Nicaragua, the embargo against Cuba, the fact that Puerto Rico is a territory with non-voting rights in the United States. Her attitude is, how dare the United States dictate how another country should run itself? So that to me is more anti-American than pro-Cuba. And then you go to what she was going to do against what we were going into Afghanistan. And what she told us about what her plan was. I mean, that's completely un-American. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care, if you hate our country or not. But men and women going to harm's way to bring justice to what happened on 9/11. I mean, there's no debate over that. If you're not on Team America in that moment, then you're just anti-American as far as I'm concerned.
But she didn't grow up in an anti-American environment. No. Her father was a high-ranking military member. I think her sister was an FBI translator. And I mean, unless they were, propagandizing against the U.S. when she was a child or something. So she must have picked this up somewhere on her own. I would guess maybe at a university somewhere. That's still happening today. And somehow parlayed it into spying against her country.
mom and dad, Mr. and Mrs. Montes, for their flaws, and Mr. Montes had a lot of flaws. I was told by her siblings that mom and dad raised them very morally. They had political views, and they had views that they sometimes would talk about things, but nothing was extreme in any direction. But you're right, because Ana's brother Tito went to work for the FBI. He was an agent, dedicated his career to chasing domestic terrorists around. He was an SOG, and the acronym. Help me out here. The SOG,
Surveillance
Special Operations Group.
Right. So agents do surveillance with guns against really bad people, gangbangers and domestic terrorists, people who might shoot back. Whereas we have specialists who do surveillance on counterintelligence cases who are not armed. They're called the Gs. Tito dedicated his whole life to, being an armed agent, following domestic terrorists and bank robbers and bad people around, China, and served honorably, retired honorably. And Lucy, her sister, was a translator in our Miami office and did a phenomenal job, all raised by the same parents and all vehemently opposed to and disgusted, frankly, with what she did. So it's been a very difficult 22 years for her mother. As a mom, like how do you support your daughter who you always love, but you kind of hate the sin, but love the sinner. I mean, that's the only analogy that I can think, having never been in that situation. Very good family. And unfortunately, she just kind of cut against the grain.
Pete, was there a plan in place with at least the sister and the brother, that when the arrest was going down, someone in their individual offices were notified and pulled them in a room somewhere and said, just so you're not reading this on the internet or watching on TV? I hope the Bureau did that for them.
They did. I mean, we obviously, I can't remember if we had cases against them, to be honest with you. If we did, they would have been in Miami and Atlanta, where Tito and Lucy were working. I mean, regardless, the original intelligence that we had that started this off, and then combined with our investigation, it showed that the siblings had no knowledge of this whatsoever. So we had no suspicion, and we were not just protecting them because they were, brothers and sisters in the FBI. My handcuffs were fresh and ready to go, and I wouldn't have had any problem arresting an FBI translator but trust me, this was a lone wolf, isolated, and her sister has actually told me, probably as recently as 6 months ago, that I really appreciate you and Steve, my partner, arresting her, because it would have broke my heart if I found out and would have had to have turned her in. And that's the kind of anguish that the families had to go through. But yeah, we had Del Spry, actually, in Atlanta. Del was the case agent on the Aldrich Ames case, and he was the supervisor down in Atlanta. And he called in Tito and Tito's wife at the time. They're now divorced. So Tito's wife was retired as an FBI agent. So Ana's sister-in-law was an FBI agent, and he sat them down and said, your sister, Tito, your sister's been arrested for espionage, and that was heartbreaking for Tito. He really struggled for a long time trying to get it. And Lucy too. Lucy and Joni, the entire family was just in shock.
Pete, tell us about Ana the person. What was she like? What was she seeing someone seriously? Was she dating? What kind of person was she?
She is highly intelligent. She's a very smart woman, very well educated, worldly in the sense of having a worldview. Can have empathy, but it depends on who's the recipient, who she believes is the rightful recipient of that empathy. Interpersonally, she's pretty cold, not a warm person by all accounts. She was very good at compartmenting, work friends, work people she worked with. She never went to happy hours, right? Never socialized with work people out of work, because what if they get to know her better and get to know her views? And so she was very guarded. Not a pleasant person. Could be very intellectually arrogant to coworkers, but she was oftentimes right, which I think helped with that arrogance, if you will. And then finally, she was dating, the time of our investigation, she was dating a guy named Roger, who worked for the Department of Defense. He was an analyst on Cuba. They were actually peers, but he was living in Miami, and the relationship was maturing, and she was in love, and she thought they were going to get married, and was at a point in her relationship and in her life in general where she was going to tell the Cubans, I can't do this anymore. I have to see, I'm exhausted. It's just, I've helped you guys. It's been great, but I need to live my life, because she hated working at DIA. She hated her job because she knew she was surrounded by true believers who believed in the mission of protecting the United States.
When you first interviewed her, was it at the arrest or was it prior to? Did you have a chance to meet her prior to the arrest? And what was your impression? Or maybe you've already given that impression to us, but let's put it this way. When you arrested her, what was her reaction?
So I met her maybe 5 minutes before, just prior to her arrest. 10 days after 9/11, the director of the DIA said, "This is it, enough. Like, you either arrest her or I'm going to fire her." And it helped get the Department of Justice, the bigger Justice Department, to let us talk to prosecutors. And they were convinced that we had enough to arrest her. So we had an arrest warrant in her back pocket. She was called down to the Inspector General's office at DIA under the pretext of, I have to talk to the IG about it was a kind of a Mickey Mouse little issue. But she got, called down, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, she walked into the conference room and met two FBI agents, Steve McCoy and myself. And we introduced ourselves. And frankly, we thought she was going to collapse. I think maybe I can't speak for Steve, but I thought, again, her gender, I probably thought that, this is a woman and we're going to tell her she's under arrest for espionage and basically your life's over and she's just going to faint. And truth be told, not only did she not faint, but I do think she could have carried one of us out on her back. That's how stoic she was. And I wouldn't say she was proud, because she definitely was not proud. But, here's the thing I've thought about in the course of writing the book. We had known her name for 10 months. We had planned for this day for 10 months and worked towards this day, but for 10 months. She had planned for this day for 17 years. She hoped it never came, but years before we ever knew the name Ana Montes, I think she was planning one day to maybe, hopefully not, but meet the FBI on our terms and not hers. So I think when we introduced ourselves and said, "Hey, we're special agents of the FBI from the Washington field office. We work Cuban counterintelligence. Please sit down." The game plan of shut up, compose yourself. This is it. I think she pulled that out and she executed it brilliantly, because she showed no emotion. She had a little physiological reaction that I saw at key moments, but nothing that, it's a moment I'll never forget. It's one of those lifetime memories, if you will.
So if you had to say, and I don't want to give away too much in your book, But how long did her career span with Cuba?
17 years. She started in September of 1985. She's arrested September of 2001, just shy of her 17th anniversary. And from day one, she was spying for Cuba. She went to DIA only for the purpose of spying for Cuba. So, day one, she was fully recruited. So,
Wow.
The system, didn't prevent her from not getting into, DIA, getting a clearance, getting access and eventually working her way up to be the Queen of Cuba.
Pete, was there any strategy to considering flipping her and have her be a double agent?
No, because the risk.
When I hear about her now, I think it wouldn't have worked, but just early on.
Yeah, the fear is fleeing the country.
Sure.
Like Edward Lee Howard, who was a Russian American who was accused of or under suspicion for spying for Russia. He literally was being tailed by the FBI surveillance and escaped and died decades later in Russia. So that's always the model of, if you flip them, you never really control them. They could always flee. And in her house, we found a getaway bag. She had 4 crisp $100 bills and maps of cities around the world. So she could have left pretty, not easy, not while she was under surveillance. I mean, she wasn't leaving the United States, but she had means and certainly motive because, espionage can be punishable by death. So why stick around if you know you're under investigation?
And how old was she at the time of the arrest?
45. 45.
Okay. Is she still incarcerated, Pete?
Yeah, unfortunately not. She got out. So she agreed. We agreed, the government and her agreed to a 25-year prison sentence. There's sentencing is hard. There's no magic formula in these cases. You look at precedent, you look at, okay, Ames and Hansen, pled guilty, but they had death penalty counts. So it was either life or death. That's your choice. And they chose life. So their plea was for life. The best we could get at trial was a life sentence. So, being the defendant, you're not going to say, I'm 45 years old. Okay, a life sentence for me is 40 years, maybe 45 years. So it's got to be better deal than 40 years. And we came up with the number 25. Now, and if we knew then what we know now, based on what she told us, and could use that, I think 25. I think what I've said is, I respect the plea. I was a part of the plea, and I think she should feel very lucky to be free.
Have you had the chance to speak to her since she's been out?
No. I asked a question indirectly, but I don't know if it was known that it came from me. But no, I've not talked to her since 2005.
Would you like
she
to?
Knows,
would you
she
like
knows
to,
about
would you
the
like
book.
to speak with her?
What's that?
Would you like to speak? Would you like to speak with her?
Pete, before you answer that, just so you know, Ray is now best friends with the bank robber he locked up about 15 years ago. They socialized. You had a coming out party or something with him, right, Ray?
Not sure about the coming out party, but I haven't seen him.
What are you thinking of?
I have no idea. When he came out of prison, right? That's what I'm thinking.
Yes.
Right.
There you go.
It was 22 years, 23 years ago now. So it's been 23 years. In 2001, we locked him up.
Carl Gugasian, by the way, the subject of 30 Years on the Run. That's Ray's book,
Pete knows,
as we know.
Pete knows about it. But, I mean, Pete, if you had the opportunity or presented itself, would you be interested in speaking to her?
Yeah. I don't think it would go well. I definitely was very black and white, right and wrong back then. And I think that my paradigm bled through. I don't think I did a very good job of playing the stone poker face and just asking the questions. I think for whatever reason she just connected with my partner much better than I connected with her. And he was older. He was probably 20 years older, so they were closer in age. I mean, he could tell you the difference between a Sandinista and a Contra, and I didn't give a shit. It didn't matter to me, frankly. So I think she looked down on me academically and intellectually, and because I was a cop, I don't think she thought very highly of me, and I don't know how that conversation would go. The one question I would want to ask her is, today in 2023, having spent 17 years and 22 years, so 39 years of your 67 years on this planet, honestly, was it worth it? Like, all that time living a life in either freedom or in jail, incarcerated, was it worth it? Do you think you really helped the Cubans and hurt the United States? And was it really worth it? And I think, her answer would be BS. I think she would say absolutely, because I think she has to tell herself, or else how do you justify that you wasted 39 years of your life, making a mistake? I think she has to die on that sword. But it'd be nice to know whether she, truly thinks it was worth it or not. But
I think
that's a good question. I don't have any interest in talking to her. Will we ever? I don't know, maybe, but probably not. I think the book, I tried to be with the book, I tried to not be judgmental. I didn't want my opinions to come through. And maybe there were times when I couldn't hold back, but I tried to be as even keel as I could and let the reader come to their own conclusion. I mean, obviously I have a perspective. I mean, I'm from law enforcement. What she did was legally wrong and criminal. And, but there's a lot of people out there that think that she's a hero. And that's
sure
crazy. It's, Edward Snowden has 5 million Twitter followers, and they're many of them, most of them are fans. So she's got a fan club. And I think that's, for our current government and folks in the FBI and working in the intelligence community, that should be a little scary.
Hey, Pete, the funny thing about it is serial killers have fan clubs. So when you think about it, I mean, it's a lot of this is beyond belief in some of these things. Some of the worst serial killers in America, you have people that call them, people that not call them, but send them letters that communicate with them and want to come and see them and get
they want to marry them.
Marry
them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pete, just did she have any role models or idols? I'm always familiar with the World War I female spy, Mata Hari, who was spying for the Germans. She was eventually executed when she was caught. But I think she used not only memorization, but she used sex to actually get secrets out of people too. Did you actually go through any of her books or libraries? Certainly her searching on the internet, anything to do with other spies or even female spies?
No, not to my recollection. Okay. There was no model, no inspiration from, her inspiration was to really try and help Cuba and help Nicaragua against the United States. That was her main driving force.
Well, I want to kind of wrap this up as we all have a place to be tonight. Any final thoughts? Yeah, I see that hat back there, Pete. I agree with you. Any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience, Pete?
And how do we get the book?
So Amazon it's available on Amazon. The book will be out on November 14th. Barnes and Nobles, anywhere you buy books, you can order it. There's an audio version that was narrated by an actor named George Newbern, who I had never heard of his name before, but he was Charlie in the series Scandal. Which I am now watching. And George is a really great guy. Had a nice conversation. So a real actor, not some wannabe rock star narrating the book. Yeah, Barnes and Nobles or Amazon. Queen of Cuba, November 14th. We have an event coming up at the Spy Museum on December 6th. That's going to be great if people are in the DC area. Go to the Spy Museum. Their website will have some information, and I'm just excited. I'm really, I'm proud of it. I hope that my version of the story resonates with the reader and goes beyond, just folks in the Beltway. I want people, the middle class family in Iowa that reads. I want them to read or listen to the book and learn about, and put the FBI. It puts the FBI in a different light. I mean, the FBI is lately, really, as you both know, been crucified, and mistakes happen, things happen, but like this is, and mistakes happened in the Montes case. We made mistakes, and we're just good people trying to, raise families, keep marriages together. And, oh, by the way, we're following spies and bank robbers and all sorts of bad people while we're, trying to live normal lives. And it's tough. So hopefully I've humanized an FBI agent for the reader, and they maybe look at them a little differently. That's one of my hopes.
Any final thoughts, Jim?
No, just this sounds like a great book. I've read some summaries of it. I can't wait to actually get my hands on it itself. And Pete, we never met before, but your casework speaks for itself. And I like the certainly all three of us have the Philadelphia roots in common, and law enforcement even before the Bureau. So again, thanks for being our guest on Cold Red. Should I take us out, Ray?
Well, let me just give me my final thought, Pete. I want to thank you for joining us and shedding light on your remarkable career in this remarkable case. Make sure, everybody, you check out his new book, The Queen of Cuba, available for sale on November 14th. Jim, take us home.
Again, thanks, Pete. Thanks, Ray. Everyone, thanks for signing in here, listening to us, or watching us. Please check out the coldredpodcast.com. Subscribe to us. And beyond everything else, you take care of yourself and keep yourself very much aware of your surroundings. It may just save your life. And see everyone next time on Cold Red.